I'm Cinder Niemela, and along with Charlotte Gilmano, welcome to the Inspired Wisdom Podcast. I believe the most powerful gifts you can give yourself is time to reflect on your talents and experience, and then have the wisdom to act with confidence and grace. This podcast is for entrepreneurs, leaders, and individuals who want to thrive in work and life. Your journey to being connected and inspired by the world around you starts right now. Today my guest is Sinartus Sosrodjojo. Sinartus is from Jakarta, Indonesia. I'm really excited to have Sinartus join us. Indonesia is a beautiful and vast archipelago. It's the size of the United States from east to west. You may be familiar with Bali, New Guinea, and Java. These are the more commonly traveled and familiar places in Indonesia. Jakarta is the capital, and it has a population of over 10 million, and that was in 2014. In the early 21st century, Indonesia was the most populous country in Southeast Asia, and the fourth most populous in the world. And many people don't realize that Indonesia is also 89% Muslim. When Sinartus was in the third grade, his parents asked him if he'd like to go to boarding school in California. Excited by the prospect of a plane ride, Sinartus responded with an enthusiastic yes. Sinartus went on to complete high school and then college in California before returning to Jakarta in 2000 as a photojournalist. He is currently focused on the intersection of customer engagement and employee engagement with data analysis and good business processes. If you want to do business in Indonesia, you have Indonesians on your team, or you're looking for your next travel destination, or perhaps you'd like to learn about different cultures, you won't want to miss my conversation with Sinartus. Sinartus will share with us what he learned about adjusting to life as a student in the United States, returning home to Indonesia and feeling like a foreigner in his own country, pivoting his career as the digital world replaced print media, lessons learned as an entrepreneur with everything on the line, distinctions between Western and Eastern cultures, and its impact on education, cultural norms, and business. And I couldn't resist what Indonesians are learning as they watch the current U.S. political arena. And he'll also give some travel tips. Sinartus, welcome to the call. I'm so looking forward to talking with you and hearing more about what you do and more about Indonesia as well.
Yeah, well, I'm really glad to have this opportunity with you.
Thank you.
Cinder, is that the way you pronounce it, right?
Yes, just like Cinderella.
Yes.
And how do you pronounce your last name?
Sosrodjojo.
Oh, I see. Sosrodjojo.
There you go. Yeah.
I have to say it really fast. And are you originally from Indonesia?
Yes, I was born in Indonesia, but I did leave Jakarta when I was 9 years old, 1985, and I moved to the States. I mean, I went to school in the States. I'm kind of sort of the hybrid person, I guess. I'm not neither pure Indonesian or neither American. I'm sort of like in between.
A global citizen.
A global citizen, yeah. Well, so I guess that's a better way than put it in a halfway house or something like that.
Yeah, really. How is it that you came to the U.S. when you were 9 years old?
Well, I believe at that time the U.S. was very open, and I had an aunt and uncle who are U.S. citizens. They moved since the 60s. And they were gracious enough to help my family and a couple other families sponsored us. For at that time, having permanent residency was a little bit more lax. And so I believe my parents just, I remember having a conversation. My dad and mom just asked me, called me up to their room, says, would you like to study in the States? And of course, at that time, being in the third grade, all I could think about was just the airplane ride. I said, yes. Sure. Without any second thought. I've been living in a dorm, if I calculate correctly, for about 12 years.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't until the first night in the dorm that I suddenly realized, oh my gosh, what did I get myself into?
And did your parents stay in Indonesia?
Yes, they did. I saw them only once a year, twice if I were lucky, but, because the plane tickets are really expensive. And, my father was just also building his career then. It was a bit difficult at first. I was fortunate enough that some of my families were in the US, like my aunt and uncle, and I had some of my cousins. I still kept in touch with my family very often. So that was nice.
And where did you go in the US?
For the first 5 years, I was in a military Catholic school in Anaheim, just right a couple of blocks away from Disneyland in Orange County. Yeah, it's a double whammy. You have the Catholicism, and then you have the military side. So if discipline wasn't enough during the daytime with the ex-military people from Vietnam, at nighttime we were also under the very watchful eyes of the Dominican sisters, whom I love dearest to bits. I've just recently visited the school again this December, bringing my wife and my 2 children. And that school has just really shaped me to, who I am. It was tough, but it was a really good 5 years of my life there.
Then you went to high school also in the US?
I did. I continued on. I did 1 year because I thought that, maybe military life wasn't so bad after all. So I decided to go to another military academy in Culver, Indiana for 1 year. And suddenly I realized after that, 6 years of military was enough. So I moved back to the West Coast, to Monterey Bay, California, and I went to school there, Robert Louis Stevenson.
What was that like, going to school there?
Oh my gosh, that was heavenly. It's not only that area is just filled with beauty and nature. I woke up to the sound of seals. The staff were great, the people were great, and again, it's a lot of the things that I kind of absorbed from just the kindness of people and the guidance. Those schools really shaped me up to who I am today. And I'm absolutely fortunate to have all those, being able to participate in all those kind of schools and, meeting those kind of people.
What did you take away from going to those schools?
It's okay to be yourself. I came from, I wouldn't really say a hardened Asian family. My parents were lovely when I was growing up. They didn't, they weren't sort of the tiger mom type of profiles. They wanted me to do well in school, but they didn't really kind of ram things down my throat to make sure that I get all A's and things like that. But you have this certain expectation as an Asian person to always achieve the best. I had to kind of balance myself out because here I was in an American environment, which was a wonderful environment to always ask the question why. Mm-hmm. And in Asia, you don't really ask the question why a lot in education. And that is the definitive, in my opinion, the definitive difference is between the 2 regions, is that when you start to ask the question why, you really start to learn things because you really understand the process. Mm-hmm. Whereas in Asia, there's a lot of memorization. And God forbid, to question the teachers in Asia, that would not have gone really well. In America, you are encouraged to ask the questions. But again, of course, I realized how fortunate I was to be in good schools. They foster that kind of thinking. Prior to going to college, I learned that, it's all right to be myself. It's all right to have critical thinking. So that kind of, embedded in me before college time.
You stayed on the West Coast and went to Occidental College.
I did, yes. I decided to, I had several options of which schools I wanted to go to. I realized I'm not the best in academia. So I know my chances of going to Ivy Leagues. It wasn't that good of a chance for me. Let's just say I did enjoy my study, but then again, I tried to enjoy nature as well. I picked up cycling when I was in the Monterey Bay area because it was just such the best place to, to have this cycling freedom around there. I wanted to go to to a school where the ratio for students to teachers are, it's actually kind of like 1 to 3, if I'm not mistaken, in Occidental. I mean, the whole school, when I entered freshman year, if I recall correctly, only had 1,600 students.
Wow.
That's all for 4 years of, for the whole 4-year classes. And it was like, okay, and this is quite interesting. I really do like the smaller type of classrooms. On average, we had, I believe, about 12 to 16 people per classroom. The lectures were no more than, I think, 100 people or something along that line. So it was really nice to be able to, to have that engaging conversation. And that's where I really picked up, the importance of engaging. I mean, I already had the backgrounds of, it's all right to ask the questions. It's all right to have a critical thinking. But here at Oxy, it fostered this whole side of, hey, let's engage furthermore. Let's have the deeper discussions. It's a bed mix of people from various backgrounds at Oxy, so it was nice.
During your time going to school, did you meet other people who were also from Indonesia?
I purposely picked a school that had the least amount of Indonesians. The reason why is that in Indonesia, it's very common to go to a school where there's a lot of Indonesians. For many Indonesian students, I was a little bit different than most of them for the reason that I started going to school in the States when I was in the 4th grade in elementary, and a lot of these students who are coming in, usually it's either some of them may be high school, but a majority of them would be coming in from college or university time. And what would happen is that, like any other society, and I guess abroad, you tend to congregate. And I saw that happening, through, my cousins who went through different schools. I saw that happening when they get together. And it was just like, well, what's the difference between hanging around with them in Los Angeles versus hanging around in Indonesia? There's nothing. There's no difference. It's the same. You tend to, when you congregate like that, the views and, and the way that, the activities that you do and things like that, they tend to be kind of more or less the same. I've been, in a way, westernized enough that it was really, again, realizing what I like and who I was turning out to be. I didn't really enjoy that. I wanted to be hanging around with students from international exchange students from Europe, that came to Oxy. I wanted to be able to, learn about the local, areas instead of, hanging around just basically with, the same Indonesians that I would meet down in Jakarta anyways. So I ended up picking a school that I thought there was, I want diversity. I want to be able to understand different people. And that's the reason why I picked Oxy. I think Oxy, when I arrived, had 2 other Indonesian students. I did become a good friend with one of them, but at the end of the time, I did spend a lot of my time with other people.
Well, it's interesting because we do hear that the U.S. culture is individualistic, and sometimes that's put in a good light, and sometimes that's put in a kind of a negative light. On the positive side, we're inquisitive. We do ask why, but we're also very independent. By the time you were in 4th grade, you were making a lot of your own decisions.
Yeah, it's, well, I mean, you kind of had to. Again, we had really good guidance in my first school, St. Catherine Military School. The guidance was there. But yes, being in a boarding school when you were 9 years old, going on 10, you had to be self-sufficient. You had to, take care of yourself. I grew up really, really fast. I mean, I had some English lessons before, prior to leaving Indonesia. But that, when when I arrived, it all went out of the doors. Just like my English was just basically back to zero again. But within a month, because I was forced to interact with the other students in English, I picked it up, being only 9, I picked it up really fast. The individualism, as you mentioned, yes, in America, I think does have that. And that's the wonderful part about my whole experience. At least I know that I have that dosage of individualism. but I also have the dosage of family values that Asian really focus on. And sometimes I think they focus too much on that. I would hate to say the word because I think a lot of people would hate me, suffocate you. It's kind of, being either a leftist or rightist, you kind of have to balance the whole situation. So I was lucky enough to understand that. When I graduated from college, I realized that, well, I have these two different views. I cannot be critical thinking in front of some people. I have to kind of tone it down and keep some of the opinions to myself, including my parents. But at the same time, when I'm allowed to have critical thinking, that's the time where I really, enjoy myself and I'm, be most creative. In that sense.
Oh, that's interesting. So when did you move back to Indonesia?
I moved back to Indonesia February 2000. I was already working by then as a photojournalist. So I've been working right after college in 98. At that time, Indonesia was going through a lot. In 98, we had our May riots when Suharto came down from his 32 years of reign. The whole world was kind of focusing a lot on the Southeast Asian communities. China wasn't that big of a hotbed yet. So as a photojournalist, I thought like, well, this is my chance to cover the things that are happening in the region in my own country. I resigned from my position in the States and I flew over, and then I started the base back to my folks' place, and I started working out of Indonesia.
So you started working as a photojournalist in the US and then returned. What was it like for you to return to Indonesia after living so long in the US?
I was a foreigner. In in many ways in there, I'm still a foreigner. I mean, there are times when I'm really exhausted after working and I'm tired, my Indonesian just goes down the hill. The majority of the time, including with time that I spend with my family, with my wife, I still think in English, I still talk in English. And it was really difficult just because here I am trying to immerse with the culture and people would notice the accent. Although I'm getting better at it. I mean, when I first landed in February 2000, a lot of my friends told me like, gosh, we thought you're Malaysian or you're, Singaporean or whatever, it's like, you're not from Indonesia, definitely. But it has to do, I think, a lot also with the mannerism that I had to adjust myself. But, again, this is kind of like the whole check and balance system of, okay, you realize you're kind of a foreigner in your own country, so therefore you got to get your act together to make sure that you're not offending anyone. For example, like when you hand things to people, you can't use your left hand, you have to use your right hand. Subtle things like that which are quite offensive. I had to kind of go through the whole 101 lesson myself and said, okay, this is how you live down here, so kind of have to used to that.
What else should Americans be aware of?
Well, just giving people face. And this is where the self-critical thinking kind of have to be toned down. Let's say you're in a discussion, with people and you know that they're wrong or certain things are not aligned with, what you're thinking. It's just kind of best to nod and, just to give that person some face. I mean, the funny part about it is before I moved back to Indonesia, if anyone wants to move to Asia, the book that I would really recommend is that Dale Carnegie's book on how to win friends and influence people, because it's all kind of written there. In Indonesia, it's the best thing to do is to give people face. A lot of the things that how you can get further down, to get things done, is just to make sure that you're always friendly, smile, and respectful. It's still a country that it's undergoing a lot of development, not only in infrastructure, but I think it's also in terms of the way we think. I know myself, I was frustrated at times because I wanted to move faster when I was doing certain things. Sometimes you can't really push that because one thing is a lot of the people didn't have the same level of education in terms of the critical thinking. So when you work with people, not to put them down or anything like that, not to say that I'm superior than them, but it's just we kind of have to understand the context of how the system works. I remember one point when I was reporting, and I found this very, very offensive. There was some chief journalist representing a big newspaper in the States. He was in a town reporting, and it wasn't exactly a very peachy story. It was a town in dire needs, and they went into someone's house, and these people, what happens in Indonesia when you host someone, they try their best to make sure that the guests are comfortable. So they would bring out this food and things like that. And well, this journalist, didn't touch a single piece of food that they were offering. And I find that really offensive because you gotta, you have to respect them. You have to take the bite. You have to, drink the tea or coffee. And you talk to them and you thank them. I think a lot of the things in America, what I did find was that everything was in a hurry. You tend to do things in a hurry. You kind of forget in terms of, there's the word for it in Indonesia, it's called silaturahmi, which means that you are spending time with them. It's essentially what Dale Carnegie would say, when you're engaging with someone, you make sure that you have your full interest in them. Mm-hmm. It's very much aligned in that sense. That's one of the things that if you do a silaturahmi, you go into someone's house or you meet up with someone, you really give them time. And I myself have violated that rule several times because I'm in a rush, because I still have my Western thinking hat on. I know I've offended people because I did not give that extra time to them to really spend time with them.
I do remember that time in around 2000 because we took a cruise from Singapore to Bali, and it was December of 1999, and we were supposed to go to Jakarta, and we didn't go because of, I guess they were afraid of some riots. How long did that kind of internal war go on?
It went on for a couple more years, I would say, in terms of like how the country wasn't that stable yet since 98. I didn't witness a 98 riot because I literally was graduating a couple of days after the riot. I came in 99 to cover the first ever democratic election in Indonesia. So during that time you were there, it wasn't that stable. I mean, the May riot was still fresh in people's minds. A lot of the university students were killed. They were still fresh. All those memories. We had a couple of changes in presidency. One Gus Dur went down and it was replaced by Megawati Sukarno Putri, and it was still not 100% settled in yet. I think one of the reasons that Indonesia didn't really stabilize after that was just, and maybe some people will argue with me on this, but it's just the level of education. When Indonesia was ruled by Suharto, it was a completely authoritarian rule. The military was really powerful. And president after him suddenly made these changes that kind of like opened up the floodgates. And then suddenly people had this whole freedom that they weren't really used to. It took a while for people to kind of settle in. For example, there was suddenly the freedom of the press. Before, the press was heavily censored. It takes time for people to understand what is it, the meaning of a press, of freedom of a press. And then suddenly, you had the regional autonomy of places, which, opened up, if I'm not mistaken, during Habibie's time when there was an internship president. When Suharto came down, Habibie came to power. And that gave the different regions the autonomy to run their region as they kind of wish, because before everything was centralized around Java. And that, what caused a lot of this disparity as well. We were adjusting. I would say we were just learning and adjusting, but it's unfortunate because I would say the education level wasn't high enough. Indonesians tend to have this ability to do well when they're in groups. And that could be a positive thing, and that could also be a negative thing. So when you don't have that level of education and you are congregated in groups, the next thing that could turn the table around is, the weighing issues of, let's say, religion. We're an 18, I believe, a 90 or 89% Muslim country.
Mm-hmm.
And when religion comes to play, in any religion, I'm not only saying Muslims, but in any religion, because what I've witnessed also in the Western society, certain religion comes to play. It can go the good way or it can go the bad way. And right now, what we witnessed in Indonesia recently was our Jakarta governor race was probably one of the dirtiest elections that I've seen so far. And a lot of my friends and colleagues also agree to that. Because religion was being put forefront as the issue. So we are still going through this changes right now, and I think we kind of have to educate ourselves to realize logically wishful thinking that a lot of people use their logics in terms of what are the right steps and what are the wrong steps to take.
Mm-hmm. So Indonesia is 89% Muslim. I didn't realize it was that high.
I believe it. Can't quote me on this because I haven't really seen the last census, but if I'm not mistaken, it was a lot higher before. It was close to like 90 something before, but I might be wrong. But I know, if I'm not mistaken, the latest stats that I saw was something like 89%. I mean, we've always been the largest Muslim country in the world.
Yes, yeah. And I think people don't realize how big Indonesia is.
Western side of Indonesia, Sabang, and then you take the city, and then you take the far eastern side of Indonesia, Merauke. It spans about almost to the United States, from the west coast to the east coast. It's a unique country. It's an archipelago, so it comes with a lot of challenges as well. Trying to keep everyone tied in together. We've got this under our rule of belief of Pancasila. Pancasila is our, it's the way we govern the rules. Which all kind of races are equal. We have different religions, and Pancasila kind of holds the whole country together. Yeah, so it's a lot of the things that are happening recently is just kind of scary because it challenges our whole beliefs in Pancasila. But as I said, it's I think we are learning. We're learning as a nation, so hopefully, we'll get there one day.
Yes, well, it's fascinating. And Bali, where we wound up, is a Hindu.
Yeah, it's a Hindu island, and I think a lot of Americans would associate Indonesia with only Bali, right? And
yeah,
but they are far beautiful places in Indonesia. Unfortunately, the tourism has only been developed properly, I would say, in Bali. But other places are starting to get there. We have a lot better places than Bali as for tourism spots.
Oh, interesting. Well, people will need to contact you for that information because that could be a whole call on its own. I'm curious because I looked at your website, and I will put the link to your website in the show notes. I'm fascinated with your passion for cycling. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I was cycling since I was a little boy, in Jakarta. It was the only way to kind of, have my own freedom. And then I rekindled that love, back when I was in Monterey Bay in high school. A good friend of mine reintroduced me to, the whole bicycle. So I got into it. And what I love about it is just, it gives me a kind of an exercise and then a time to reflect on myself if I'm riding alone. But when I'm riding in groups, usually the camaraderie between cyclists is quite nice. It's quite compact kind of group. That's one thing that I really do miss, Cinder. In the States, there are a lot of roads. There are a lot of nice places to cycle. I mean, I was able just to get off from campus, start cycling, and it's not the same here in Jakarta, at least. It's just congestion and things like that. The one thing that caught me with cycling was the fact that I can just enjoy the breeze in my face, as I'm riding along. For me, there's nothing better than that. You forget everything. You forget the stresses of everything, the daily life, and you just pedal on continuously, and and it slows you down. That's one thing too. I mean, of course, nothing slows you down than walking.
Mhm.
But when you're cycling, it slows you down and you notice things, and you start to notice, what's going on in front of you or on the side of you. Especially now, I think in a digital age, that's one thing too that I like about cycling now. I can't touch my phone.
Yes.
Well, I could, usually people use their phones for GPS mapping, things like that. But, most of the time I would have it because it's really not that safe in Jakarta to have your phone on the bike. So, I would just, insert it in a bag, but it just alleviates me from all those digital, gadgets, and just focusing on riding and focusing, enjoying and noticing what's in front of me.
Is Jakarta a safe city for cycling, or do you need to go outside the city?
You really need to go outside the city. I mean, I might not be popular for saying this. I don't want to sugarcoat it, but it isn't exactly a cycling hotbed. I mean, people do go for cycling. I know I have good friends, with their cycling clubs. They do lots of rides within Jakarta. For me, I think I've been spoiled by the States.
Mm-hmm.
That going back here to cycle it's not fun.
Mm-hmm.
You're literally playing the lottery ticket. But even so, I try my best to take my bike from home, from where I live, to work, just because I need it. I want to be able to cycle, so I take that risk sometimes, and just I just go. But you're going to be fighting with the motorbikes, the cars, the buses. And not only that, I wear a face mask, to keep the pollution away. But Jakarta should be better now because we're building the whole infrastructure of MRTs, the trains, the city trains. So hopefully that would alleviate a little bit of the traffic and give some more rooms for the cyclists.
Yes, I do remember. I do remember the traffic there from. I think the first time I went to Jakarta was in '82.
Oh
And
gosh.
boy, it was crazy then.
Oh, it's far worse now.
I bet it is. Oh my
It's
gosh.
far worse now.
So
Yeah.
you went from photojournalism, and then tell us a little bit about your career and some of the changes you made and where you wound up.
Right. I mean, I started photojournalism in '98, right after college. I did an internship of about 4 months before I graduated because there was nothing else for me to do since I finished everything. And I did that till 2010. So about 12 years, I did, journalism-based kind of work. I managed to start a photo agency out of that during my 12 years, and I started a nonprofit to teach photojournalism in Indonesia. When I started the photo agency, I realized that I was moving from a shooter to a management base type of work. When I started the agency right after September 11, 2001, I realized that, I'm going to try to enjoy as long as possible because I know the media industry isn't exactly the most stable industry.
Mhm.
When I decided to be a photojournalist out of college, I realized that I wasn't going to be rich, doing this, but it was something that I really, really was passionate about then, and I loved it. So, I decided just to follow my heart and took the risk. During, close towards the 10 years on, I realized that, okay, the industry is, as predicted, starting to really slow down because when I was doing the agency business, I had clients in Hong Kong from Time Magazine. I had clients from several other magazines that are based in Hong Kong and in Australia and all sorts of places. And one by one, they were starting to close down because of budgetary issues. And I think that's also when the internet was coming in and, people were starting to shift from print. Television has already kind of eaten up a lot of the print's value too before the internet came. But then when the internet came, and the whole thing that triggered me was when BlackBerry was really massive in Indonesia. And I was then consulting for a news media outlet. And when I saw the BlackBerry, how it was infecting a lot of people and how it was really the platform that people were getting the news, I suddenly realized that yeah, it's the time, this is the time where I needed to shut down the operation and try other things. And it was the whole I guess, fascination with the BlackBerry, and also realizing that the digital platform, apart from websites, I realized that websites themselves wasn't going to be able to change completely the scene of how people engage in news and in information. But when BlackBerry came, it was the first successful one. And so I knew that I had to make that shift. And that was, I think, the biggest challenge in my career, was shifting from, being known for the last 12 years as a media person, as a photojournalist, as a photographer, and then shifting myself to an industry which I had no clue what it was about. I'm not a programmer, I don't know anything about codes, but all I had with me was just a knowledge of, okay, how do you engage? How do you deliver the information to people? And of course, I know the, thing or two about storytelling. So at least I have that sort of assets behind me. Yeah, and then I decided to make the switch in 2010.
And the switch was into a digital business?
It was to a digital business. At first, I decided to go into building an app. At that time, apps were, sort of kind of new into the whole scene. Mm-hmm. And Indonesia has a large, as I said, base of mobile users already by then through BlackBerry. An iPhone was starting to go in. And I remembered having this discussion with my wife. It's like, okay, listen, this is going to be a big jump. I'm going to risk everything. We're going to risk probably all our savings going into this business. And, when I looked at it, well, at least I'm still young. At that time, I only had one child. She was just 1 year old by then. And I thought, well, it's kind of now or never. If I do fail, I can always go back to, photography or the media outlet. Mm-hmm. So I searched with her in terms of what is the focus of this new digital company. And in Indonesia, the whole promotions of retail, of how people were, getting the discounts and things like that, were all over town. And we have, I believe, one of the highest promotional values for credit cards in the region. I mean, there would be discounts, everywhere for 50% sometimes, for 60 or even 70% or 80. And people were just getting these information through just banners. And I thought, well, it would be interesting to put all of those informations about the different credit cards into an app. And then this was the one thing that I wanted to try. And my gosh, if I have all this information, and people register for the app, I can then find out how many people have which credit cards and how many people were actually liking certain promotions. And this was the time where I was fascinated by data, and I kind of had to learn from scratch about data. So I started, okay, well, it's a worthwhile idea, so let's do it. And that's when I there was a learning curve. And I think I made the biggest mistake doing that project. And I didn't realize the mistake until about 1.5 years into it. And my mistake was it was all an assumption. Me, along with other partners that we brought in, friends that we brought in to do the project, some with an IT background, some with the social media background. And the 1.5 years, that was sort of my MBA. It was sort of like, yes, you had a good idea, but all the things that we talk about in the room, they were all assumptions. And I wish I had, and after that, that's when there's several books that came out, talk about minimal viable products, a lot of these jargons that, the IT startup industry would throw at you. But the logic behind it is essentially, when you have an idea, before you start investing in anything, confirm it first with at least 50 people, whether they want to use it.
That's the nugget right there.
Right there. It's like, would you use it? And also, talk about the assumptions of people who are willing to pay for it, or the industries that are willing to pay for it. We thought that we were going to sell this data to banks, to the credit card issuers themselves. Mm-hmm. But then we realized in the first 2-3 meetings with banks, suddenly, the banks don't want to be all budgeted into one app. They don't want to be compared against one and another. So it was never going to work. Yeah, so it was a really quick and easy way to realize that, oops, I made a mistake. So I had to then what they call a pivot.
Yes.
So so by that time I already had my team, and I decided, okay, what else can we do? We had the mobile developers already. I somehow managed with some helps of my friends who were the investors, but I was literally the one who was only running the company. They were kind of behind the scene. We built this team, and then we have mobile developers. I said, okay, well, there's the whole thing, and this is before the Uber delivery of food and things like that in the States. And we were like, there's a lot of places, restaurants that do deliveries. What if we do a delivery app that we sell, to a lot of these businesses? And this time we actually did a little bit of survey. This time we actually, talked to people about it, and they were interested. And once we built the delivery app, we had two major companies who signed on with us. So we were happy. We were like, yes, okay, this might be it. But then suddenly there's this, it's sort of the equivalent to Uber in Indonesia, but using motorbikes. Mm-hmm. It's called Gojek. Basically, Gojeks are motorcycle drivers who are like taxi drivers. And it was fun when they were first starting, just to modernize the way the fleets of how people were getting this motorcycle drivers. But then they started right away after we launched, not long after we launched, they opened up their food division, the delivery division. Mm-hmm. And they were a much bigger operation than we are still now. They were, I think at that time, they already reached a substantial amount of investment. I had to really look at the whole situation. I was a bit panicking, but I was kind of like, okay, relax. We got to look at the situation now. The problem with the whole, with Gojek coming in with the motorcycle driver and the delivery of food was that what we found as we were talking to clients was that it wasn't so much the delivery app that they needed, the ordering app that they need. A lot of the restaurants didn't want to keep their own drivers, their own motorcycle drivers, because it's just a lot of hassle for them. So they, that's not their core business, which makes sense. They just want to, produce the food, and they want someone else to carry out the orders. When we were starting out the app, this wasn't, this did not exist yet. And I did not catch on to that during, a lot of talking to customers who were, I guess, biased in our own ways. And we were still, we were kind of more open-minded, but we were still biased. Hey, you can, order through the app, and you can learn how it is. And the next step would be the loyalty, you will know, and you get the data. Mm-hmm. But, when this opened up, I really had to think long, hard. And funny enough, it was also another close to 2 years of development, and we already got 2 big clients. But then when this came up, we realized a lot of the clients that we were trying to approach started to turn us down. Mm-hmm. Just because they suddenly realized, I'll just use, Gojek, because, I don't have to carry, I don't have to care about the delivery. They already got their whole fleet of people. Then I had to make another decision. Okay, do I keep on going, in hopes that I can sell my system so that I can go head against them, because hopefully companies will care about the data. And that's the whole other thing, that I had to be truthful with myself. A lot of these companies, when the whole IT world are talking about the importance of data, a lot of companies who are successful, they are not using data. Mm-hmm. They don't, really consider data to be their number one priority. Their number one priority is just to sell food, to have a higher sales every month and to open up more outlets. And I suddenly realized, well, my war chest is not as big as their war chest. Mm-hmm. And for me, we've tried to sell the ideas to a lot of VCs, VCs mainly, not private equities. And, no one was biting. So it came to, again, I had to go into the drawing board to say, okay, what do we need to do? Luckily, I was introduced by a good friend to a property magnate. These guys are huge. They own lots of properties. They have lots of shopping retailers. And the discussion kind of sparked an interest in him when he was introduced to me and, showing what I could do with the data. And I did tell him, well, the next step that I wanted to do is, after the ordering system, is the loyalty system, because then, businesses can figure out, who are the top 20% spenders and all sorts of demographic and everything. And right there on the spot, he says like, okay, I like this idea. Why don't I hire you guys to build our loyalty system for our malls? And it was sort of like, wow, what just what just happened? It's sort of like, wow. I mean, I came home, I remember, coming home and told my wife, I think we might have just saved our business. Because wow. it was literally coming to the point where, maybe it's time to throw in the flag. We've been doing it by then, almost 4 years or closing to 5 years. And we had used up, all our savings. We were going in, trying to ask for more funds for people, but they weren't, putting it in. And I was just about to write it off as a really long MBA, So I never did go to graduate school. So I thought like, well, I guess this is going to be my graduate school time. And I did learn a lot in those 5 years, but then somehow along the line, we came up to this. And the thing is, we did have the right team of people. We did have the right idea of what we wanted to do with data. So luckily, it just came to all into one, point where this guy came in and suddenly said, okay, we're on.
And is that what you're doing now?
It is what we're doing now. We ended up providing a loyalty platform, a CRM loyalty platform for retailers, for shopping malls in Indonesia. We have this one big group. They're going to have about 13 shopping malls, and then we're trying to expand it to other shopping industries as well.
Oh, that is awesome. What's one thing you know now that you wish you knew earlier?
The assumptions factor. It's a lot of the things that funny enough, I did not do a thorough check before shooting out the ideas into actions. It's just to really, really do the research. I mean, we did the whole SWOT analysis. We did everything, and sometimes when you're all caught up in the whole excitement of building a business, it's easy to miss a thing or two, because the whole bandwagon is kind of with you. The whole team is kind of excited, and you really need to kind of leave the building and literally just have an expedition of walk everywhere and just not be connected maybe. I think I was too connected to the whole scene, and I didn't take a break. Maybe I didn't ride my bike enough. When you tend to be caught up in the whole idea, everything seems rosy. It's kind of like dating, right? When you're first dating someone, it's all fun, it's all great, but you really have to see it, when things are not great. You kind of have to see the worst case scenarios, and I really did not. I couldn't have predicted that, the assumptions that we made. So, I mean, the second pivot that we had was just bad luck. That was just something that I could have probably gotten closer into the research of, okay, these, restaurants, the one thing that the main factor, the problem is not the ordering, it's actually the delivery. But, I was a victim of being part of the bandwagon of like the idea. So it's really probably very important just to kind of like, stop and think of all, of all the things and check whether these are these assumptions or are these all facts.
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, we do learn. I mean, that's the wisdom part of this podcast, that we do learn from our experience, these defining moments and our failures. I mean, they're equally as important, because we can see then what our biases are and where we may be blind to the possibilities. And I love the way you started out by saying critical thinking was something that you learned in the US, something that you took away, something that you noticed. But it's hard to be completely objective when you've got these unconscious biases that creep in.
Yeah. Right. I mean, it's so easy to read from a book and, to read off all these success stories. And I kind of wish I read more failure stories.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, no, because that's, I mean, I've noticed that, because I keep reading all this inspiration books by people who created, great companies, great organizations, how they maintain their great organizations and people. But what I should have been, reading a lot more was probably how a lot of companies fail. So I began searching for books like that, and it's, then you suddenly, right, that happened. I was like, okay, that happened. But sometimes, Cinder, I think it's really just learning. I mean, it's the whole process of learning, right? And that's I think I'm kind of safe by the U.S. mentality as well of it's okay failing, because that's not exactly an Asian mentality. So it was a good learning process.
Mm-hmm. Now how old are your children now?
My eldest is 8, my youngest is 5.
What kind of a world do you see for them?
It's definitely an overdose of digital. We try our best to minimize that. When when my first child came, I decided to disconnect the cable TV. Mm-hmm. And I said, we're all going to suffer. We're going to have TV, but I just don't want them to be living their lives in front of a television. Since 8 years ago, we don't have a cable TV. We actually don't have a TV period now at home. The way that they're raised up now, and what we've noticed in schools, is that a lot of these kids, they process things much faster than we do. And I think that has a lot to do with the digital age. The way they're swiping is so natural, and you're looking at it like, wow, it's the old analog days are really going to be behind us. Yes. But luckily our first born, she loves to read books, physical books, so we just spoil her on that. I mean, if she wants to buy more books, that's fine. She can have any books that she wants, but she can't watch TV too much, but she can have all the books that she wants. But it's interesting to see how the development is. And the one thing that I'm quite saddened with in Indonesia is that a lot of the schools are starting to be more English instead of learning our own Bahasa Indonesian. Mm-hmm. And that's, in my opinion, that's horrible. So you've got a lot of these youngsters who can't really speak Indonesian that well. And
so they
they're
speak
all coming
English in school?
Yeah. Yes, they do. We tried our best to put in our child into a regular Indonesian school, but unfortunately they didn't work out because the way that they were teaching was, remember what I mentioned earlier in the beginning of this talk, was it's a lot of memorization. It's a lot more about not questioning the teachers. Some of that was still happening. So, my oldest daughter just couldn't bear that. So we had to move her to another school. It's a good school, but unfortunately, English is the primary. And I'm not sure whether it's because of the teaching. It's probably also because of, these kids now, what they watch, they have more access to English materials, YouTube and, the movies and things like that. It's quite sad. I mean, you see smaller kids who can't even go on the street and talk to the street food vendor and order some dish in regular Bahasa Indonesia. They would have to splash an English or two here and there. Interesting.
How about their parents? Do a lot of their parents and grandparents speak English?
Well, that's a thing. I'm a bit of a hypocrite for saying this because I speak mostly English myself. A lot of these parents, they try to essentially ram down English when they're talking to their kids. It shows a level of perhaps prestigious, being in a prestigious community or, wanting to be part of that, crowd of being able to speak English. Mm-hmm. I know that I'm being a hypocrite by saying that because I'm mostly speaking English. It's kind of sad to see it because I was hoping that my kids are going to be able to be immersed more in an Indonesian language.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not the case. A lot of the schools, they do dual language, English and Indonesian. I think they make an attempt, but it's just the way the society is. It's a very English-driven society.
We're going to wrap up in just a minute, but I do want to
Sure.
know what Indonesia, if you could speak on behalf of your millions of people, what you think of the current political environment in the United States.
In the United States, well, it's giving a lot of ideas to other countries of the things that could go wrong, unfortunately. I see a lot of similarities now, the way that the politics in the States versus the politics in Indonesia, and where you literally are trying to bring out the worst out of people. And in many ways, I still see the US as my home, even though I'm no longer there. I've been living there for 16 years. I was really, in a lot of ways, sheltered because I was living in California, and majority of my time was living in Southern California, where the diversity is just immense. It makes you think twice in many ways. It makes you kind of look at it. Okay, do we have to be careful now? When we're traveling, seeing a lot of the things that are happening in the news. But at the same time, I think it's happening all around the world as well. And a lot of this, different opinions and things like that are, a lot of them are, I think, stem from the lack of understanding from both sides. Mm-hmm. I totally see, the views from the far right. I also see the views from the far left as well, and those people kind of in the middle. There are certain point of views that from both sides that are somehow correct. For example, like when I was going to college, as I mentioned, I really wanted to hang around with people who are not Indonesians, because it's the only way for me to understand and respect the community around. I didn't feel comfortable speaking out, blabbering in Indonesian in a large group when I was in the States. We tend to be a bit loud. When we're in a restaurant, things like that, I feel a little bit, okay, I think we're a bit too loud here. And I have a sense of, we're in America. It doesn't mean that you're not allowed to speak Indonesian or anything like that. But there's a certain, maybe because I was brought up differently. So I had a little bit of I feel very uncomfortable right now. Because there's a lot of people here, and I think we should be kind of immersed in also in the surrounding. And a lot of misunderstandings do come out from that, and usually in larger groups. Whenever there's larger groups, you tend to have a lot of these things happening. I think it's a very unnerving time for all of us right now, not only in what's happening in the States, but it's also what's happening in Indonesia.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that. You certainly have given us a lot to think about and appreciate about cultural differences. And that's part of my objective, is to help us better understand and appreciate the gifts that we all bring.
Right.
So I really do appreciate it. How can people get a hold of you?
I can be found through LinkedIn, just by my name, Sinartuss. And I have a website that has a little bit of a history of my journey at sinartuss.com. And if people wanted to get in touch with me, there's a ability to contact me through there.
Oh, wonderful. Well, thank you so much. And I will put those links in the show notes. And also, I do encourage people to go to your website, because your bikes and the stories that you have around your cycling, they're really fascinating.
Thank you. I just thought that was only for me, but.
I found them very fascinating. And thank you so much for joining me today. I've really enjoyed listening to your story, and especially the differences of kind of growing up in the US and then going back to Indonesia, and your perceptions about the differences in our cultures. I really do appreciate your sharing that with us.
Well, thank you for the opportunity, Cinder. It's been a pleasure.
So you're so welcome. Talk to you soon.
Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
I'm Cinder Niemela, and you've been listening to the Inspired Wisdom Podcast. Thank you for joining us. We hope these conversations illuminate your path to your highest potential. For show notes and links to resources mentioned during today's episode, please go to inspiredwisdom.us. You can also follow Inspired Wisdom on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Until next time, design a fulfilling and prosperous life that engages your talents and passions.